It was a cold December afternoon in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Emily Carter, a 24-year-old young woman, was finishing her shift at a clothing store in the city center. With her modest beauty and reserved demeanor, Emily carried in her eyes the calmness of someone who grew up in a religious household. Raised by a traditional evangelical family, her values were always deeply rooted in Christian faith principles. Philadelphia was a big city, but Emily lived in a more distant residential neighborhood, where her routine revolved around the local church and her job at the store. Her life followed a simple and predictable path until she met Mark Dawson, a local businessman. Mark owned a well-known furniture store in the city. He had been married to Laura for over 10 years and had always maintained a good reputation. Charismatic and skilled at making conversation, he stood out at social events in the city. However, behind his trustworthy smile, there was a darker side that few knew about. When Emily and Mark first met, there was an unexpected connection. Mark, always used to getting what he wanted, became fascinated by the simplicity and innocence Emily exuded. He started visiting the store where she worked, always finding an excuse to talk to her. Gradually, their relationship grew, and Emily, who had never been involved in anything outside the boundaries of her church, found herself caught in a forbidden passion. At first, Emily resisted. She knew she shouldn't get close to a married man, and her upbringing prevented her from taking any action that went against her faith. But Mark's constant attention, sweet words, and seductive charm captivated her. After months of discreet encounters, she could no longer resist. It was on a cold January night that Emily finally gave in to temptation. Mark took her to a motel on the outskirts of the city, where they spent the night together. That night changed everything in Emily's life. The feeling of guilt gnawed at her, but the love she felt for Mark kept her tied to him. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but she was already too involved to turn back. A few months later, Emily discovered she was pregnant. The shock of the news was overwhelming. She knew the pregnancy would mean the end of her reputation, rejection from the church, and the scandal that would fall upon her family. Desperate, she sought out Mark, hoping for his support. Mark, however, reacted in a cold and calculating way. He feared his wife would find out about the affair and, more importantly, about the pregnancy. Knowing that this would destroy his marriage and his position in the city, he was blunt. "You have to get rid of the baby." Terrified by the idea, Emily refused. Raised with the unshakable belief in the sanctity of life, she could never have an abortion. Mark's response left her shaken. He began to pressure her, demanding she get rid of the child. When he realized she wouldn't budge, he started thinking of a more drastic solution. A few days later, Mark showed up at Emily's door with a proposal. He suggested they take a night drive, saying they needed to talk away from the city, where no one would know them. Still in shock from the pregnancy and searching for a solution, Emily agreed. They drove along a rural road, far from the heart of Philadelphia, surrounded by trees and hills. The silence in the car was tense. Emily stared out the window, worried, while Mark maintained a hard expression. At one point, he broke the silence with a chilling revelation. "I'm not going to let you ruin my life. This ends here." Emily felt a wave of terror rise in her chest. The man she thought she loved was about to do something terrible. Without thinking, she opened the car door while it was moving and jumped out, tumbling down the hillside beside the road. The fall was brutal. She felt her body crash against rocks and branches as she tumbled down. In the middle of the night, Mark stopped the car and tried to look for her, but he couldn't find her in the darkness. Frustrated and afraid of being caught, he returned to the city, leaving Emily behind to die. At dawn, farmers working on a nearby farm heard groaning coming from a dense patch of vegetation. They followed the sound and found Emily, severely injured, lying near a corral. They rushed her to the city hospital immediately, but she had no identification and was too weak to speak. She remained in the hospital for a week while her family frantically searched for her everywhere. Finally, after days of searching, Emily's family found out where she was. They were relieved to find her alive, but horrified by her condition. When questioned by the police and Emily's family, Mark claimed he had been in a car accident and said he didn't remember anything from the night Emily disappeared. His plan to cover up the truth seemed to be working. Emily remained hospitalized for several days. Her body was covered in injuries, fractures, deep cuts, and bruises that marred her pale skin. But the emotional pain was far worse. Even amid the physical agony, she was consumed by guilt and fear. Silence was her only defense. She couldn't bring herself to talk about what really happened on that dark night when Mark tried to take her life. The weight of the secret she carried, combined with the fact that she was pregnant, made everything unbearable. Her family, especially her mother, Sarah Carter, couldn't understand what had happened. Sarah was a deeply religious woman, heavily involved in the church, and had always taught her daughter to follow God's path. Seeing Emily in that state, wounded and broken, shattered her heart. She sensed there was more to the accident than Emily was letting on, but her daughter refused to give any explanation. "Honey, what really happened that night?" Sarah gently asked as she held Emily's hand in the hospital. Emily looked away, unable to meet her mother's gaze. She knew the truth would bring a storm of problems and scandals she wasn't ready to face. The weight of judgment from the church and society, along with the rejection she feared from her own family, kept her locked in silence. Meanwhile, Mark Dawson tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy in his life. His furniture store in downtown Philadelphia kept running, and he continued to play the role of a successful businessman and devoted husband. His wife, Laura, suspected nothing. To her, Mark was the loyal and trustworthy man he had always been. But Mark lived in constant fear that Emily, or someone close to her, would reveal the truth. Weeks went by, and Emily was discharged from the hospital. Now back home, she tried to recover both physically and emotionally. However, her pregnancy was beginning to show. The secret she kept in silence would soon become visible to everyone. Sarah and John Carter, her father, grew increasingly worried. Sarah, in particular, felt there was something darker behind the accident. Then, on a rainy night, Emily, unable to cope with the growing pressure and the pain she felt, finally gave in to the weight of the truth. During dinner, with tears streaming down her face, she confessed to her parents, "I'm pregnant, and the baby's father is Mark Dawson." The confession was like a bomb going off in her family. Sarah, in shock, dropped the plate she was holding, while John, usually calm and composed, felt a surge of anger building inside him. Emily explained that she had been involved with Mark, that he was married, and that he had pressured her to have an abortion. When she refused, he tried to kill her that fateful night. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah, visibly shaken, couldn't believe what she was hearing. "How could you, Emily?" Sarah whispered, tears spilling over her cheeks. It wasn't just the fact that Emily had gotten involved with a married man that hurt her. It was the deadly danger her daughter had been exposed to. John, on the other hand, began to think about how he could confront Mark. What he had done to his daughter was unforgivable. Emily, however, begged them not to take any action. She feared that if the story came out, the consequences would be even worse. She didn't want the whole town to know about her involvement with Mark, nor did she want her family to be dragged into the scandal. But the secret didn't stay hidden for long. Even in a large city like Philadelphia, some neighborhoods were tight-knit, and rumors spread quickly. Shortly after Emily's confession to her family, whispers started circulating. People gossiped in the streets, and soon enough, the church they attended began noticing Emily's absence from services. What had been a closely guarded secret soon became the subject of speculation. Mark, feeling increasingly cornered, knew that time was running out. The rumor that he was the father of Emily's baby had already begun to circulate. Laura, his wife, started noticing changes in her husband's behavior. He was becoming more distant and evasive. One day, Laura confronted Mark. The marriage that, to everyone else, seemed perfect, was beginning to crumble. She knew something was wrong, but Mark, feeling trapped, denied everything, sticking to the story that Emily's accident was just a tragic event. However, the more he tried to hide the truth, the more people began to ask questions. The once respected businessman now had the shadow of scandal looming over him. Tension in Philadelphia was escalating quickly. The affair between Emily Carter and Mark Dawson was no longer just a whispered rumor, but something that had begun to gain traction in street conversations and, inevitably, among members of the local church. Both of their reputations were at risk, and Mark knew he couldn't keep the truth hidden for much longer. With increasing pressure, he became more impulsive, fearing that his life would completely unravel. Then, fate took an unexpected turn. One day, while Emily was still trying to figure out how to deal with the growing social pressure and her advancing pregnancy, she received an unexpected visit. Laura Dawson, Mark's wife, appeared at her door. There was something in Laura's eyes, a mixture of pain, anger, and betrayal. "I know everything," Laura said, her voice steady but clearly pained. "Mark tried to hide it from me, but I'm not blind. I want to hear the truth from you." Emily felt her world spinning. She had feared this moment from the start, but now it was here, standing right in front of her. With tears in her eyes and her voice trembling, Emily told her everything. The affair with Mark, the pregnancy, and the night he tried to end her life. Laura listened silently, her gaze fixed on the young woman as the words landed like painful blows. When Emily finished, Laura remained silent for a few seconds, absorbing the devastating revelation. The marriage she had believed to be solid, her trust in Mark, everything had been shattered. And more than the affair itself, the attempted murder was the final straw. Without saying another word, she stood up and left Emily's house, leaving her both confused and relieved that she had finally spoken the truth. From that moment on, things began to fall apart rapidly for Mark. Laura wasn't the kind of woman to stay silent. She confronted her husband at home, demanding he confess. When he tried to lie again, she completely exposed him. The confrontation was intense, and Laura didn't hesitate to threaten to make everything public if Mark didn't leave her life once and for all. Meanwhile, Sarah and John Carter, Emily's parents, met with the church leaders to seek support. With Emily's pregnancy progressing, she was becoming more vulnerable, and the family feared the judgment their daughter would face. The church, which had always been a significant pillar in the Carters' lives, now looked at them with a mix of pity and condemnation. To many, Emily was a victim of circumstance, but others made no secret of their belief that she had been involved in something immoral. Mark, on the other hand, began to feel the weight of his actions. With his wife demanding a divorce, and the community learning more and more details about his affair with Emily, he decided he had no choice but to disappear. He sold his furniture store and within a few weeks left the city without a trace. To Philadelphia, he was now a shadow of the past, a man who had fallen from a position of respect to the depths of disgrace. The entire city was buzzing about Mark's sudden departure. Some believed he had left out of shame, while others knew the fear of being fully exposed had driven him away. Emily, in turn, saw her life change dramatically after Mark's disappearance. Although she still faced judgment from many in the community, she found a sense of peace in knowing that the man who had nearly destroyed her life was no longer around. After Mark Dawson's sudden disappearance, Emily Carter's life began to take a new direction. The city of Philadelphia was still buzzing with whispers and speculation about the scandal, but over time, people started to move on. The truth is, in a big city like Philadelphia, dramas eventually lose their grip, and other events take their place in the community's conversations. Emily, however, continued to carry the scars, both physical and emotional. As her pregnancy progressed, the baby became the center of her life. She decided that, despite everything that had happened, she would protect and love this child. The baby, though born out of a forbidden and painful relationship, represented new hope for her. Her parents, Sarah and John, despite their initial shock, gave Emily their full support. They helped her face society's judgment and, more importantly, find the strength to move forward. Sarah, who had initially felt betrayed by the path her daughter had taken, now saw Emily through new eyes. She understood that her daughter's pain was not only the result of her choices, but also the selfish actions of Mark. The family's faith was tested, but they found comfort in one another, rebuilding the bonds that had been shaken. A few months later, Emily gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. She decided to name him Lucas, and he became the symbol of her renewal. Motherhood gave Emily a new sense of purpose and the strength to face the world with more courage. She resolved to start fresh, dedicating herself entirely to Lucas's well-being. In time, Emily found a new path within the church, though on her own terms. She returned, no longer seeking judgment or absolution from others, but as a woman who now understood the complexities of life and faith. The religious leaders, recognizing her determination, began to respect her once more, and those who had once condemned her started to see her as an example of redemption and resilience. As time passed, Emily's story, once a scandal, became just another forgotten chapter in the city's memory. Mark Dawson never returned to Philadelphia, and few people knew for sure where he had gone. Many believed he had hidden away for good, driven by shame and fear of the consequences his wife, Laura, could impose if she ever found him again. Years later, Emily found peace in her life. She married David, a kind and hard-working man who welcomed her and accepted Lucas as his own son. The couple built a simple, happy life in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Lucas, now a teenager, never knew his biological father, but he grew up surrounded by love. And to him, David was the only father he ever needed. Emily, now a mature woman, became a grandmother. Sitting on her porch, watching her grandchildren play in the yard, she reflected on how much she had overcome. The weight of the past no longer haunted her. The wrong choices, the painful moments, all had shaped her into the strong woman she had become. Deep down, Emily knew she couldn't erase what had happened, but she had learned to live with her scars. The peace she felt now came from the love she had built over the years, the family she had created, and the path she had walked to find her own forgiveness. The story of Mark Dawson was buried by time, just like his presence in Philadelphia. The city, like Emily, moved on. And although many would never know the full details of what really happened between them, Emily could now look to the future with hope, free from the shadows of the past. Decades had passed since that dark night when Emily leapt from a moving car to save her own life. The name Mark Dawson had completely disappeared from the lips of Philadelphia's residents, as if he had never existed. Emily's life had taken new directions, and while the painful past was still part of her story, it was no longer an unbearable burden. She now lived a peaceful life alongside her husband, David, surrounded by the children and grandchildren who filled her with joy. Time had proven to be the best healer for the wounds she carried, though the arrival of old age brought moments of reflection. One afternoon, with Benjamin now an adult, married, and with children of his own, Emily found herself revisiting the past. While her present was filled with love and accomplishments, what happened that night had never been fully forgotten. Mark had never crossed paths with Emily or her family again. After his escape, he became an unsolved mystery, with some even believing he had left the country. He disappeared without a trace, selling his furniture store and vanishing from Philadelphia. The shadow he once cast over Emily's life had finally faded with time. Now, a grandmother, wiser and more at peace, Emily understood that her life's journey had been marked by deep pain, but also by incredible resilience. The decision to keep moving forward, to rise and carry on even when everything seemed lost, had shaped who she had become. Every difficult moment transformed her into a strong woman, capable of guiding her family with wisdom. The love Emily found in David helped heal her emotional wounds. He was a devoted companion, helping her rebuild trust and restore her faith in a future she once thought impossible. Her grandchildren, whom she adored deeply, were living proof that she had overcome her hardships. On one of those reflective days, as she watched her grandchildren playing in the backyard, Emily felt that she had finally found the peace she had long sought. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted her, and the sense of having built a full life filled her with gratitude. She had survived a story that many would not have endured, and that survival was her greatest victory. Now, with the scars of the past buried by time, Emily could look to the future with serenity. She understood that pain was part of life, but she also knew that just as she had conquered the challenges of her past, any future hardships could be faced with the same strength. Mark Dawson, on the other hand, remained a mystery, a man lost in his own story. Some say he found another place to start over, while others believe he lived the rest of his life quietly burdened by guilt. Either way, he was never seen again. Over time, Emily's story became an example of perseverance. The cycle of suffering that once threatened to destroy her had given way to a legacy of resilience and peace. Now, a beloved and respected grandmother, she had left behind the shadows of that dark past and built a life marked by love and redemption.